So the first thing I do is I figure out what I want to teach. And in this case, I'm going to think about labeling. And I'm going to copy and paste or rewrite the actual definition of labeling that I pulled from the Big Idea Glossary. But then I'm going to write some things that are reminders to me that it's not so much about the children as it is about my actions. So I'm going to teach word labels. And I'm going to teach word meaning. This helps me kind of get some focus to what I'm trying to work on versus just thinking about expressive language. I also want to be thoughtful about the function because I can come up with labels and I can come up with word meaning and I can start teaching that in a really decontextualized way. And that means I can do it in a way that's just sort of memorizing. Kind of direct instruction. And I really want to think about the function. So if children are able to label, they can then start to catalog and classify and search and assign. And by doing these things, they can participate in daily routines and so forth. So after I've taken some time to define labels, I might even write some synonyms. So I might think about that when children label, they're going to say something. I might even think a little bit about that they might point to something. This is a little bit beyond what we think about in terms of labeling, but remember, I kind of extended it and thought more about word meaning. And so if I want to know if a child understands what I'm asking, then they might do something that's more nonverbal, like point to something or follow directions. They might even engage in some matching. So I want to really think about all the ways that children can start to show me that they know that there are word labels and that they know what word meaning is. And so I've kind of expanded upon this Big Idea Glossary label, and that's fine to do. You can mix and match things. You can combine gold items with Big Idea Glossary items, whatever sort of makes sense for what you want to teach. So really, I'm going to get kids to say something, and that something is really a single word. It's not a phrase, it's not a sentence, it's not a conversation. This is really word identification. Now, I have to be careful here that I don't start getting into written expression and making kids be accountable to understand what written words might mean. So we got to really make sure that we're staying at the level that we want for this particular target. After I've thought about the definition, I've thought about really what my actions are, and I've thought about what the synonyms are or different ways to think about it, I can start to generate a list of things that I might need to think more about. So in this case, I'm going to come up with a vocab list. I need to come up with something that tells me what are the actual words that kids are going to identify, what are the things that they're going to say, what are the things that I'm going to expect them to point to. This will start to impact the materials that I decide to teach with, as well as my instructional strategies of how to teach. So some of the things that I could do is I could think of domains or content areas. So I could think about math, and I could make a list around math. I could come up with emotional types of vocabulary. I could come up with animals. So we might be doing a theme around animals. And so I want to brainstorm at least 10 things in each of these places where I'm going to list. And maybe I say to myself, well, I want to do animals, but I don't want to just do the common everyday animals. So then I'm going to make myself a note that I'm going to Google interesting animals. Now, this might even turn into a point where I can have kids on a smartboard do some of this searching as well. But at the same time, I need to counter this kind of interesting animals with those that are familiar. So I might want to look up those that live in Iowa. What are animals that are indigenous to Iowa? Ones that kids would see on a daily basis. And so I might take a minute and stop working on my intentional instructional activity and just do a quick internet search on my phone or my iPad. I might even just sit for a minute and just brainstorm myself. What are kind of the animals that I see on a day-to-day basis that I know my kids would see in their community? And then what are some interesting animals? We can also think about common things that are in the classroom. So I could go on kind of an environmental walk, and I could go around to my different centers. I could look at my It's hard to write and talk. I can look at my different toys and materials, and I can just make a running list. What are the things that are in our classroom? Now, we always want to broaden and say, well, there's life outside the classroom. So what would this child see on their way to school, while they're at school, and then when they're home from school? So I might need to ask families to generate a list of common objects in their home. 5 things that the child will probably interact with or see every day. I might need to do that kind of environmental scan or walkabout, kind of from the child's eye, the child's level. As the child gets off the bus or is dropped off, what do they see each and every day? And then I might even think about some of my kids in particular, and if they're drawn to certain things like the lockers in the hallway, or they kind of get stuck on their backpacks and want to look at the animals or the Disney characters, those can become things in my list. So again, this could be endless, but I really want to focus. Where's my intentionality? I can talk about a lot of things in a day, but I'm going to really pick math, I'm going to pick animals, and I'm going to pick these common objects in the classroom. But for each one of these, I'm going to do a quick Google search and see what's kind of developmentally appropriate for preschoolers to be learning. I might look back at my gold and say, what are some of the math constructs that I need to be teaching kids to make progress? Is it about patterns? Is it about repetition? Is it about numbers and number tags? That will help me know what the words are that I want to include for mathematics. I might also look at my early learning standards and say, what are the things that kids need to know? What kind of labels? And then again, the animals, I might do a quick Google search to figure out what are some interesting animals, but I want to temper that with things that have meaning to children. So what's familiar? What are things that are indigenous to where they might live? And then I might do a quick environmental scan, a walkabout, if you will, of the classroom and just say, all right, what is it that we have in the classroom that kids get to see? And then I might do a quick look about what they see on their way to and from school, and I might do a quick check-in with families to see what they would comment that the children have access to on a daily basis. So in the end, what I have is I have a clear definition of what children are supposed to be doing. I have a clear definition of what I mean by teaching labels and teaching word meaning. This helps me and my team get on the same page and speak with one voice. I start to think a little bit about synonyms and why this is important, that children need this skill for what reason, and what other ways can I think about how children show me that they know and can do it. And then because this is vocabulary essentially, I want to make sure I have a rich list. So I'm going to make sure I have some math in there. I'm going to tie that back to the gold or my early learning standards. I'm going to look at the animals, and I'm going to temper some interesting new exotic words with familiar things that have meaning to them. And then I'm going to do things about common objects in our environment and make sure that I'm drawing attention to those things that kids see on their way to and from school as well as when they're at home.